The drive from Cookville to my daughter's place in Brentwood takes about 45 minutes on a good day. Christmas morning, roads empty, sky the color of old pewter. I made it in 38. I hadn't been invited. I hadn't called ahead. But something had been chewing at me for 3 days. A low, persistent feeling I couldn't name and couldn't shake. And after 40 years as a master electrician, I've learned not to argue with that feeling. It tells you when something's about to fail long before the lights start to flicker. My name is Wallace Pruett. I'm 63 years old. I drive a 2009 Silverado with a busted left mirror and a rosary hanging from the rear view that my wife Vera put there the week before she passed. That was 2 years ago. Pancreatic cancer, fast and final, the way Vera did most things. Even dying, she didn't linger longer than necessary. But she left things in order. She always did. Before I go any further, if this story means something to you, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button. And drop a comment letting me know where you're listening from. I want to know how far this thing travels. Because what happened that Christmas morning changed everything, and I think some of you are going to understand why. My daughter Iris had married Burke about 6 years back. He was a real estate developer out of Nashville, the kind of man who talked about investment strategies at the dinner table and kept his phone face up at all times, like he was expecting a call from someone more important than whoever was in the room. He wore good shoes and had expensive opinions. I didn't dislike him immediately. That took a few months. The house they lived in, my house, technically, the one Vera and I had transferred into the family trust 5 years earlier to give them a solid start, sat in one of those Brentwood subdivisions where every lawn looks like it's been trimmed with scissors and every porch wreath costs more than my first truck payment. Tasteful, coordinated, cold. I turned onto their street just before 9 in the morning. There was a line of cars already parked along the curb. Burke's black Range Rover, 2 cars I didn't recognize, a catering van idling by the side gate. They were having a Christmas party. My daughter hadn't mentioned it when we talked 4 days ago. She had said they were keeping it low-key this year. I almost turned around. I almost told myself I was just a 63-year-old man with nowhere better to be on a holiday morning, that I was being foolish, that I should go home to my empty house and Vera's herb garden on the kitchen windowsill and leave them alone. Then I saw the garage. The side door had a small rectangular window about halfway up, and pressed against that glass from the inside were 2 small hands. I was out of the truck before I had made any conscious decision to move. The door was unlocked. I pushed it open and the cold hit me first. The garage had no heat, and the temperature that morning was 19 degrees. My granddaughter Hazel was sitting on the concrete floor between a leaf blower and a stack of storage bins, wearing her Christmas pajamas, thin cotton, the ones with little candy canes on them that I'd helped her pick out last month at Target. She wasn't crying. That was almost worse. She was just sitting there, very still, holding a red crayon in both hands, her bare feet flat on the concrete. Hazel, sweetheart. My voice came out stripped of everything except the raw need to get to her. I was on my knees beside her in 2 seconds, pulling her into my coat, wrapping my arms around her small body. She was ice, just ice. She looked up at me with Vera's eyes, that same slate gray, and they filled slowly the way a well fills after a hard rain. Grandpa, she whispered. I drew on the wall. What wall, sweetheart? In the living room, the white wall. I was drawing Grandma Vera's Christmas tree. Her voice was barely there, her teeth trying not to chatter. The one she always put in the corner by the window, with a silver star on top. I wanted to draw it for her because she's not here this year. She held up the crayon. Mom and Burke saw it. They got really mad. I pressed my face into her hair and breathed. It took me a moment to trust myself to speak again. How long have you been out here? She looked at the small window above the door, at the light outside. Since before the people came, she said. A long time. The catering van had been there when I pulled onto the street. I had seen it from a block away. That van had been there at least an hour, probably more. Hazel had been sitting on a concrete floor in 19-degree weather, in cotton pajamas, with no shoes, for at least an hour, because she drew a Christmas tree on a white wall, for her dead grandmother. I stood up with her in my arms, 7 years old, and she weighed almost nothing. I carried her across the driveway and in through the front door. My front door, my name on the trust documents, without knocking. The party was in full swing. Iris had strung white lights through the garland on the staircase, and there was a full catered spread on the dining table. A glazed ham, those little brioche rolls she loved, a charcuterie board the size of a coffee table. 8 or 10 of their friends were scattered around the living room with champagne glasses, laughing at something. And Burke was standing near the fireplace in a cashmere sweater, looking like an advertisement for a life I had never wanted. The room went quiet the moment I walked in. I didn't say anything right away. I just stood there in my old work coat and my muddy boots with my granddaughter in my arms, her feet bare, her lips still pale, and I let them look. Let every person in that room register exactly what they were looking at. Iris was across the room. She saw Hazel first, then she saw my face, and something shifted in her expression. Not guilt, not yet. More like recalibration. She was already composing her explanation before she started walking toward me. Dad, you came. We were going to call you later, we just thought. How long? I said, my voice completely level. I have spent 40 years in environments where losing your temper costs you fingers. I know how to go still when everything in me wants to move. How long was she in that garage? The brightness on her face flickered. Burke stepped forward, one hand already raised. Listen, Wallace, this is a family situation, and I don't think. I'm asking my daughter, I said, without looking at him. Iris's jaw tightened. She damaged a freshly painted wall. It was a natural consequence. We were going to let her back in when she understood that her actions had. It is 19 degrees outside. I looked around the room at the 8 strangers watching this. She has no shoes on. She was in there before your party started, which means she has been sitting on a concrete floor for at least 90 minutes. I looked back at my daughter, for drawing a Christmas tree for her grandmother. Nobody moved. One of the women near the window looked at the floor. A man in a blazer put his glass down quietly on the side table. I held my granddaughter against my chest and looked at my daughter and her husband and said 5 words, calm, clear with 40 years of everything behind them. This house belongs to me. Burke opened his mouth and closed it. The color went out of Iris's face, and one by one, without being asked, every guest in that room found their coat. They were polite about it. A few murmured apologies. 2 women squeezed Iris's arm on the way out as if they were consoling her, which told me they weren't entirely surprised by what they'd seen. They just didn't want to be witnesses to whatever came next. Within 15 minutes, the house was empty except for the 4 of us. I didn't argue with my daughter and her husband. Not that night. I carried Hazel to the kitchen, sat her on the counter, ran warm water in the sink, and held her bare feet under the stream one at a time until the color came back. I found a wool throw on the sectional in the TV room and wrapped it around her shoulders. I made her hot cocoa from Iris's Dutch process canister in the cabinet. I didn't ask permission, and I sat with her at the island while she held the mug in both hands and slowly, carefully became warm again. Burke and Iris were somewhere behind me. I could hear them, low and urgent, down the hall. I let them talk. I let them stew. Whatever case they were building against me, they were welcome to it. That night, around midnight, I heard Hazel's door open, small footsteps in the hall, a light knock. She stood in the doorway holding her stuffed elephant, the one she'd had since she was 2, and she looked at me like she was checking that I was still there. I waved her in. She climbed into the chair by the window and tucked her feet underneath herself, and we sat in the dark together, while the neighbors' Christmas lights blinked red and green down the street. She was quiet for a long time. I didn't push. I've learned that patience isn't passive. Sometimes it's the hardest thing you can do. It's not the first time, she said finally. I looked at her. They put me outside, I mean. Last month I spilled orange juice on the sectional. Burke said I had to stay on the back porch until I could explain in words why it was my fault. She pulled the elephant tighter. It was cold. I think I was out there a really long time. The babysitter hadn't shown up that day, so it was just me. She paused. And sometimes when they have their dinner parties, I'm supposed to stay upstairs and be quiet. But I get hungry and I come down and Burke says I'm embarrassing them in front of their friends. She looked at the lights blinking outside. He uses a certain voice when he says it. I don't like that voice. Each word was a stone dropping into still water. Does your mom say anything when he does that? I asked. Hazel was quiet for a moment. She usually just goes and talks to somebody else, she said. I sat in that chair until she fell asleep. Then I sat there another hour because I didn't have anywhere else in the world more important to be. Vera had told me in her last weeks when she could still talk clearly that she was worried about Hazel. Not in a vague, grandmotherly way. Vera was never vague about anything. She said she had watched the way Burke looked at that little girl, like a variable he hadn't budgeted for, like an inconvenience he hadn't signed up for. And she said she had watched Iris slowly learn to see their daughter the same way. You'll be the one who has to keep her, Vera had said, her hand in mine. Not because you're the strongest. Because you're the one who will actually show up. I had promised her. And then I went back to Cookville and sent birthday cards and showed up at Christmas and told myself everything was fine. Everything was not fine. The next morning I told Iris I was taking Hazel back to Cookville for a few days. I said it the way you tell a crew something on a job site. Not a discussion, a statement of fact. Iris lasted about 4 seconds before she came apart. Her arms crossed, her voice at that pitch she'd had since she was 15. The one that meant she had decided she was being wronged. You cannot do that. She is my daughter. You don't have any legal authority to just. I'm informing you, I said, pouring coffee, not asking. Burke appeared behind her. He had that measured, management-trained voice going, reasonable on the surface, iron underneath. Wallace, We understand you're upset. What happened yesterday was a misunderstanding. We want to address it as a family. But taking Hazel is not an appropriate response, and frankly, it could have legal implications for you. I looked at him over my mug. It is my house, I said, and I'm handling it. I went upstairs, packed Hazel's bag while she sat on the bed watching me with very serious eyes, took her hand and walked out the front door. Neither of them stopped me. I think they understood, on some level, that stopping me would require a kind of backbone neither of them had built. We were 40 minutes outside of Brentwood when my phone lit up. Burke's number. I put it on speaker and pressed record, the way Adrian Morse, my attorney, Vera's attorney for 15 years, the woman who had helped us structure the trust, had instructed me to do. Wallace. Burke's voice was tight with the specific fury of a man not used to losing. This has gone far enough. You need to bring Hazel home today. And I want to be very clear with you about something. I heard Iris nearby, coaching him. That house represents a core asset in our financial plan. Our entire long-term strategy is built around it. Whatever you think you're doing right now is actively jeopardizing our financial security, and we will not sit here and let that happen. So it's the house you're worried about, I said. A pause. Not Hazel, the house. That's not what Burke started. Thank you for clarifying, I said. I'll be in touch. I ended the call. The little red recording light blinked. Adrian was going to want that file. The days Hazel spent with me in Cookville were the first time in a long time I watched a child remember how to just be a child. She helped me in the workshop, sanding down a small keepsake box I'd been building, her tongue between her teeth in concentration. We made chili from Vera's handwritten recipe card, the one with the coffee stain on the corner that Vera always said made it look authentic. I found Vera's old Christmas records, the Nat King Cole and Johnny Mathis albums she had played every December since before Iris was born, and Hazel listened to them with her eyes wide, like hearing something familiar she couldn't quite place. She used to play these, Hazel asked. Every year, I said, from the day after Thanksgiving straight through to New Year's. Nothing could stop her. Hazel smiled at that, a real one all the way to the eyes, first one I'd seen since the garage. Adrian Morse's office was on the 4th floor of a stone building on Charlotte Avenue in Nashville. She'd practiced family and estate law for 26 years, and she had the kind of steady authority that fills a room without raising its voice. Vera had chosen her the way Vera chose everything, carefully and long in advance. When I sat across her desk and told her what had happened on Christmas morning, she listened without interrupting. Then she retrieved the burgundy binder from the locked cabinet behind her and set it on the desk between us. Your wife called it the cornerstone clause, Adrian said. She was very particular about the language. We were here until midnight the evening she had me at it. She wouldn't leave until every word was exactly right. She read it aloud. The trust, as Vera had structured it, would pass the family assets to Iris only on the condition that the trustee, me, certified she had maintained what Vera called a demonstrable and consistent commitment to the physical, emotional, and moral well-being of her children. In the event of a credible finding to the contrary, the trustee held the authority to redirect the trust's assets entirely to protect the next generation. There was also a guardian designation clause. 2 weeks before Vera died, she had had Adrian file emergency guardian paperwork, designating me as Hazel's guardian in the event that parental conduct was found to threaten the child's welfare. Iris had signed the trust documents, but had never read them all the way through. Vera had counted on that. She said something to me directly, Adrian told me, looking over her reading glasses. She said she had never once worried about your love for that little girl. What she worried about was whether love alone, without a legal mechanism behind it, would be enough. I looked out the window at the gray Nashville sky for a moment. Tell me what you need, I said. It took about 2 weeks to build the case properly. Adrian wanted everything documented, signed, and airtight. Not a grieving grandfather acting on instinct, but an indisputable record. The medical piece came first. I took Hazel to see Dr. Pruett, a pediatrician I'd used for Iris herself 30 years before. He had examined Hazel thoroughly, asked quiet questions, and found what I had been afraid he would find. She was underweight for her age and height. Her cortisol levels, the body's primary stress hormone, were abnormally elevated for a 7-year-old, the kind of levels his notes described as consistent with chronic emotional anxiety and prolonged situational distress. He wrote it all up, stamped it, signed it, and handed it to me. Whatever you're doing, Wallace, he said, meeting my eyes, you're doing right. The neighbor piece came from a woman named Mrs. Hartley, 4 houses down from Iris and Burke, who opened her door when I knocked and looked at me for a long moment before she said, I've been wondering when someone was going to come. She told me about 3 separate evenings she had watched Hazel outside alone after dark. She told me about a Saturday afternoon, Hazel on the front porch for hours, door locked, neither parent home. She said she'd almost called someone and couldn't explain to me why she hadn't. She was willing to explain it in a sworn statement, which she signed in Adrian's office the following Wednesday. The financial piece was, in Adrian's words, the most thorough picture of self-interested recklessness she had seen in her career. She subpoenaed 2 years of their bank and credit card records using her authority as trust counsel. Burke earned around $115,000 a year. Iris made $80,000 at her marketing firm. Together, comfortable money. Not extravagant, but solid. They were spending $290,000 a year. The Franklin Country Club, $26,000 annually in dues and required minimums. The Range Rover, leased $1,500 a month. Home renovations billed directly against the trust. The kitchen remodel, the custom built-ins in Burke's study, the full interior repaint job Hazel had decorated with a red crayon, totaling $68,000 in 18 months. Back-to-back Caribbean vacations, first class both ways. A wine subscription service, a personal trainer. Restaurant tabs that ran $400 and $500 a night. My money. All of it my money, set up to flow automatically because I had trusted my daughter and never thought to look. Vera would have looked. Vera had known I wouldn't, and she had built a wall around Hazel anyway. When Adrian sent the letter, neutral, professional, official letterhead from a well-regarded law firm, inviting Marcus and Jessica, Iris and Burke, to a meeting to discuss the future administration of the Pruett family trust. Iris called me the same afternoon it arrived. She sounded, for the first time in years, almost like the daughter I used to drive to school in my old pickup. "Daddy," she said, "I think we can work all this out. Burke and I overreacted on Christmas and things got out of hand. We want to make it right." A pause. I recognized she was measuring her words. "We want to make sure the trust situation is settled properly, for everyone's sake." I listened. "I'll see you at the meeting," I said. They came dressed for a negotiation. Iris wore her good gray blazer. Burke had a leather portfolio under his arm and the focused energy of a man who expects to walk out with a deal. They sat across the long table from Adrian and me and looked like they were ready to sign something. Adrian opened the burgundy binder and did not offer coffee. She read the cornerstone clause first. I watched their faces while she did. The deal-closing energy drained out of Burke slowly, like air from a tire. Iris went very still. Then Adrian laid out the exhibits. Dr. Pruett's medical report, clinical, signed, unambiguous. Mrs. Hartley's sworn statement, the full 2-year financial summary, every line item, and then the recording. She pressed play on the device in the center of the table. Burke's voice filled the room. "That house represents a core asset in our financial plan. Our entire long-term strategy is built around it. Whatever you think you're doing right now is actively jeopardizing our financial security." Iris looked at her husband. Something happened in that moment between them, something quiet and permanent. Adrian pressed stop. The silence was absolute. "Based on the full body of evidence," Adrian said, her voice steady and final as a closing argument, "Wallace Pruett, as sole acting trustee, has determined that the conditions of the cornerstone clause have not been met. Accordingly, the trust's assets, including the residential property in Brentwood, will not transfer to the designated beneficiary. The property will be sold, and the proceeds will be placed into a separate protected account." She looked at them both over the rims of her glasses. "The sole beneficiary of that account is Hazel Pruett. Wallace Pruett will serve as her legal guardian and manage the funds for her education and welfare until she reaches the age of 25. You have 30 days to vacate the property." I had spent 3 weeks thinking about what I would say in that moment. In the end, I only said one thing. I looked at my daughter, not with anger, because the anger had burned out somewhere around 2 a.m. on Christmas morning, sitting in the dark watching my granddaughter sleep, and I said, "Your mother built this to protect Hazel. That's the only reason any of it exists. I'm sorry it took me this long to use it." Iris pressed her hand over her mouth. Her eyes filled. I still don't know, I may never know, whether she was crying because she understood what she had done or because she had lost the house. I hope it was the first one. 7 months have passed. The house in Brentwood sold fast. Good market, good neighborhood, a young family with 2 kids moved in before the end of February. Every dollar went into Hazel's trust. I heard through a mutual friend that Iris and Burke relocated to Charlotte. I don't know what they're doing. The silence between us is a particular kind of painful, the way losing a tooth aches even if the tooth had been hurting you for years. She's still my daughter. Nothing changes that. Hazel is with me in Cookville. She has been since December. She has her own room, Vera's old quilting room, yellow walls because that's what she chose. And she takes the bus home from school 3 blocks away and drops her backpack in the middle of the hallway floor and raids the kitchen before she bothers saying hello. She is healthy. She is loud. She argues about bedtime and asks me questions about Vera that I can't always answer without my voice going unsteady. Last week she found one of Vera's old Christmas ornaments in a box in the hall closet, a hand-painted silver star. She held it up in the kitchen light for a long time, turning it slowly in her small hands. "This is the one," she said, "the one I was trying to draw." "That's the one," I said. She carried it to the Christmas tree we'd put up late. Her first tree in my house, a real Douglas fir she'd helped me pick out from the lot on Main Street, and she climbed up on the arm of the sofa, reached as high as she could, and placed the silver star at the very top. Then she stepped back and stood there looking at it. Then she looked at me. "Do you think Grandma Vera can see it?" she asked. I looked at my granddaughter, 7 years old, yellow room, silver star, bare feet on the hardwood floor, and the fullness in my chest was almost more than I knew what to do with. "I think she can see all of it," I said, "every single bit." Vera used to tell me that a home is not the structure. She said it 100 times, 100 different ways, over 40 years of marriage. A home is the thing you choose to protect inside it. I thought I understood what she meant. I didn't, not fully. Not until I stood in a cold garage on Christmas morning holding a child who weighed almost nothing and had nothing but a red crayon and a dead woman's love to keep her warm. The house in Brentwood is gone. The life they built on borrowed money and borrowed time is gone. And in its place, in this small house in Cookville with the creaking floors and Vera's records on the shelf and a silver star at the top of a December tree, something real is taking root. That's a foundation I know how to trust. Have you ever had to make a hard choice to protect someone you love, even when it cost you everything else? Tell me in the comments. I want to hear your story.